I won $1,750,000 in the lottery. My parents wanted to take the money. I refused, so they kicked me out. The words echoed in my mind like a cruel mantra as I stood on the cracked pavement outside their house, clutching a duffel bag filled with hastily packed clothes and a few mementos that meant more than their weight in gold. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street where I had grown up. It should have been one of the happiest days of my life, a dream come true, but instead, it felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled into an abyss. It all started just 3 days ago when I bought that fateful lottery ticket at the corner store down the block from work. I wasn't even sure why I did it. Maybe it was boredom, or perhaps some deep-seated hope buried under years of financial struggle. Either way, I never expected anything to come of it. But then, on Thursday morning, I checked the numbers online while sipping stale coffee at my desk during another monotonous day of data entry. When the screen confirmed what I could barely comprehend, that I had matched every single number, my heart stopped. For a moment, time froze. Then panic set in. Was this real? Could this actually be happening? I called my parents first. They were always my go-to people for big news, good or bad. Growing up, we weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we were close-knit. Or so I thought. Their faces lit up with joy when I told them over video chat. My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while my dad leaned forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Are you serious?" he asked, voice trembling. "This changes everything." And it did change everything, just not in the way I imagined. By Friday evening, they were already talking about how best to use the money. At first, I didn't think much of it. Of course, they'd want to help me figure out what to do next. We sat around the dining table after dinner, the remnants of roasted chicken and mashed potatoes still scattered across plates. That's when things took a turn. My mother cleared her throat delicately, exchanging a glance with my father before turning to me. "We've been thinking," she began, her tone soft but deliberate. "You know your sister Emily has been struggling lately. With her medical bills piling up and no stable job. Well, wouldn't it make sense to give her most of the winnings? She needs it far more than you do." My stomach dropped. Emily, the adored younger sister who could do no wrong. Sweet, kind-hearted Emily whose very existence seemed to overshadow mine since childhood. Don't get me wrong, I loved her dearly. But there was always this unspoken competition between us, one I didn't realize existed until moments like these made it glaringly obvious. She was the golden child, the one everyone rallied behind. And now, apparently, she deserved my windfall too. "Mom," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me, "this is my money. I worked hard for it, okay, maybe buying the ticket wasn't exactly work, but it's mine. I didn't win it for anyone else." My father frowned, leaning back in his chair. His expression hardened, and suddenly, I saw him not as the loving father who used to tuck me into bed, but as someone entirely different. Someone cold and calculating. "But think about what this could mean for our family," he countered. "For Emily. You're young, you can start over. This is a chance to truly help someone who's suffering." Start over? As if starting over were as simple as snapping my fingers. Did they honestly believe I hadn't struggled myself? Sure, I didn't have medical bills looming over me, but I'd spent years working dead-end jobs, scraping together rent payments, skipping meals to save a few bucks. I dreamed of using the money to finally pursue my passion for photography, to travel, to build a future I could call my own. Yet here they were, ready to strip that away because it suited their narrative of sacrifice and selflessness. "I'm sorry," I said firmly, standing up from the table. "But I can't just hand over my life savings to someone else. Not even for Emily." The room fell silent. The air grew heavy, suffocating. My mother looked at me with something akin to betrayal, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "If that's how you feel," he said coldly, "then maybe you don't belong here anymore." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Belong? This was my home, or at least it used to be. Now it felt foreign, alien. Like I was staring at strangers wearing familiar faces. Before I knew it, I was being ushered toward the door, my protests drowned out by accusations of selfishness and ingratitude. By the time I found myself standing alone on the sidewalk, the reality of my situation sank in fully. I had no place to go. Now, hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the chill of night crept in, I wandered aimlessly through the streets. Each step felt heavier than the last, each breath harder to draw. What was I supposed to do now? Where could I possibly turn? Friends? Most of them were either too busy with their own lives or lived miles away. Co-workers? The idea of asking for help from someone I barely knew beyond small talk in the break room seemed laughable. As tears blurred my vision, I realized I hadn't cried yet, not properly. Maybe shock had numbed me, or maybe pride kept me from breaking down completely. But now, standing under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, I let the dam burst. Sobs racked my body, each one tearing through me like shards of glass. How had it come to this? Winning the lottery was supposed to solve problems, not create them. Instead, it had shattered my world into pieces I wasn't sure I could ever put back together. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to stop crying. Wiping my face with trembling hands, I looked around, taking stock of my surroundings. I was near the park where I used to play as a kid, its swings swaying gently in the breeze. Memories flooded back, lazy summer afternoons, laughter shared with neighborhood kids, the smell of freshly cut grass. Those moments felt impossibly distant now, like relics from a life I no longer recognized. I spotted a bench and collapsed onto it, letting my head fall into my hands. The cool metal pressed against my palms, grounding me in the present. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to regret refusing to give up the money. Deep down, I knew it was the right decision, even if it cost me everything else. A soft rustling sound nearby caught my attention. Lifting my head, I saw a stray dog watching me from a few feet away, its fur matted and dirt-streaked. Its eyes met mine, wary but curious. Slowly, cautiously, I reached out a hand. The dog hesitated before inching closer, its tail wagging tentatively. When it finally allowed me to scratch behind its ears, a small smile tugged at the corners of my lips. "You and me both, huh?" I murmured, my voice hoarse. Lost and looking for somewhere to belong. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt a flicker of connection, however fleeting, with another living being. In that moment, sitting on a park bench with a stray dog by my side, I understood that while I might not have a home anymore, I wasn't entirely alone. There was still kindness in the world, however hidden it might seem. And though the road ahead promised to be difficult, perhaps it also held the possibility of discovering something new, something unexpected. But what that something was, I couldn't begin to guess. The dog stayed by my side for a while, its presence oddly comforting. I named him Lucky, not because he looked particularly fortunate, but because I needed a reminder that luck wasn't always about winning jackpots or avoiding hardship. Sometimes, it was as simple as finding solace in the smallest of moments. When Lucky finally trotted off into the shadows of the park, I felt a pang of loneliness return, sharper than before. But his brief companionship had given me something to hold on to, the idea that even when life feels unbearably heavy, there are still sparks of light waiting to be found. I stood up from the bench, slinging my duffel bag over my shoulder. The night air was crisp now, carrying with it the faint scent of autumn leaves and damp earth. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from my bank app reminding me of the lottery winnings sitting untouched in my account. That money represented freedom, security, dreams realized, but right now, it also felt like a curse. How could something so coveted bring such chaos? Still, I clung to the knowledge that it was mine. No matter what happened next, no one could take that away from me. With nowhere else to go, I decided to head toward the bus station. If nothing else, I could buy a ticket to somewhere far away, at least for the night. Maybe distance would give me clarity, or at the very least, some breathing room. As I walked, the streets grew quieter, the hum of suburban life fading into silence. Storefronts closed their doors, and streetlights flickered on one by one, casting pools of yellow light onto empty sidewalks. Each step took me further from the home I'd known and deeper into uncertainty. When I reached the bus station, it was nearly deserted. A few people lingered on benches, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones. An elderly man slept soundly in the corner, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Behind the counter, a young attendant scrolled through social media, barely glancing up as I approached. I bought a ticket to the first destination listed on the board, Maplewood, a small town 3 hours north. It wasn't a place I'd ever heard of, but that was part of its appeal. Somewhere unfamiliar, where no one knew my name or my story. The bus arrived 20 minutes later, its engine rumbling loudly as it pulled into the station. I climbed aboard and settled into a window seat near the back, pulling my knees to my chest. Outside, the city lights blurred together as we sped away, leaving behind everything I once called home. For the first time since the argument with my parents, I allowed myself to think about them, not just the anger and betrayal, but the love that had once bound us together. What had gone wrong? Had they always seen me as expendable, or was this just another manifestation of their favoritism toward Emily? Tears welled up again, but I blinked them away quickly. Crying wouldn't change anything. Instead, I focused on the possibilities ahead. With $1.75 million, I could start over anywhere. Rent an apartment, enroll in photography classes, travel to places I'd only dreamed of visiting. But none of those options seemed real yet. They were abstract ideas floating just out of reach. All I had was this bus ride, this moment of transition between the life I'd lost and the one I hoped to build. As the miles passed, I drifted in and out of sleep, my thoughts tangled and restless. At one point, I woke to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the dark countryside. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within me, unpredictable and relentless. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to ward off the chill that seeped into the bus despite the heater running steadily. Hours later, we arrived in Maplewood. The town was quiet, almost eerily so, its main street lined with quaint storefronts and Victorian-style houses. I stepped off the bus into the cool night air, my breath visible in the frosty atmosphere. The driver handed me a slip of paper with directions to the nearest motel, which turned out to be a short walk away. The motel was modest but clean, its neon sign buzzing softly in the darkness. Inside, the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, greeted me without judgment. She handed me a key to room 6 after I paid in cash, assuring me breakfast would be served in the lobby starting at 6 o'clock. "You look like you've had a long day," she said gently. "Get some rest." Her words struck a chord. Rest. Something I hadn't truly experienced in days. Grateful for her kindness, I nodded and made my way to my room. It was small, with floral-printed wallpaper and a lumpy mattress, but it felt safe. Safe enough to let my guard down, at least for tonight. I set my duffel bag on the floor and collapsed onto the bed, staring up at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Where would I go from here? Could I rebuild my relationship with my parents, or was that bridge burned forever? And what about Emily? Did she know what our parents had tried to do? Would she blame me for refusing to share the money? But amidst all the uncertainty, one thing became clear: I couldn't keep running indefinitely. Sooner or later, I'd have to face the consequences of my decision, and figure out who I wanted to be moving forward. For now, though, I let exhaustion take over, closing my eyes and surrendering to sleep. Morning came too soon, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and waking me from a fitful slumber. I sat up groggily, rubbing my temples as fragments of last night's thoughts returned. Today was a new day, a blank slate. Whatever happened next was entirely up to me. After showering and changing into fresh clothes, I ventured out to explore Maplewood. The town had a charm that surprised me, its streets lined with cozy cafes, independent bookstores, and art galleries showcasing local talent. There was a sense of community here, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing in the hustle and bustle of city life. By midday, I found myself seated at a cafe overlooking the town square, sipping hot chocolate and sketching scenes from my surroundings in a notebook I'd picked up at the bookstore. People watching had always been one of my favorite pastimes, and capturing moments through sketches gave me a sense of peace I desperately needed. As I drew, a young girl approached my table, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Are you an artist?" she asked curiously, pointing to my notebook. "I guess you could say that," I replied with a smile. "Do you like art?" She nodded enthusiastically. "I want to be a painter when I grow up." "Well, if you keep practicing, I'm sure you'll get there," I encouraged her. We chatted for a few more minutes before her mother called her back, thanking me for talking to her daughter. Watching them walk away hand in hand, I felt a pang of longing, for family, for connection, for the simplicity of moments like these. Maybe Maplewood wasn't just a temporary escape. Maybe it could become something more. That evening, I booked a week-long stay at the motel, giving myself time to regroup and plan my next steps. I visited the local library to research affordable apartments and job opportunities in the area. Photography studios, marketing agencies, freelance gigs. It all seemed possible here, where competition wasn't as fierce and creativity was celebrated. On my third day in town, I met someone who would change everything. Clara, the owner of a small gallery specializing in emerging artists. She invited me to submit some of my work for consideration, praising my sketches and offering advice on how to refine my portfolio. Her enthusiasm reignited a passion I thought I'd lost somewhere along the way. For the first time since leaving my parents' house, I began to feel hopeful. Hopeful that I could carve out a life for myself, not just survive but thrive. Hopeful that I could prove to myself, and maybe even to them, that winning the lottery wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. And yet, deep down, I knew challenges lay ahead. Rebuilding trust, navigating relationships, figuring out how to use my newfound wealth responsibly, all of it loomed large in my mind. But for now, I chose to focus on the present, on the tiny victories and unexpected joys that reminded me why I deserved happiness too. Little did I know, fate had other plans in store. Plans that would test my resolve, stretch my limits, and force me to confront truths I'd buried long ago. Because sometimes, the hardest battles come not from external forces, but from within ourselves.